All right, welcome to the Board of Ethics meeting, June 24th, 2015. Can we have a roll call, please?
William Falsey.
Here.
Terrence Kelly.
Here.
Kathleen King.
Here.
David Nesbitt.
Here.
Keith Silver.
Here.
Also present is Dee Ennis, Deputy Municipal Attorney, Glenda Regnard, Administrative Hearing Officer, Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk, Kathleen Plunkett, Anchorage School Board, and myself, Lisa Slusner, Clerk Staff Support. We have a quorum.
And one more.
Oh, I'm sorry. And also Assembly Member Amy Demboski.
So it looks like we want to reorder the agenda a little bit based on some things that have come in recently. Do we go to the approval first?
Yes.
And then we change it?
Mhm.
So, okay, so let's approve the agenda so that we can then change it. How about that?
So moved.
Second? All right. Any opposition? All right, so it's approved. Passes. Now let's reorder it and take up 6A first. What is 6A again?
So if you'll make
that-
both motions completely, David, and then get a second and an approval,
You mean
just read it out, the motions.
the whole, like all of them? Because we're not going to do 7D, right?
Then you can take that one off.
All right, we're taking 7D off.
Okay.
So we're going to take up, so the proposal is that we take up item 6A immediately.
So moved.
Second.
Then we also take up item 7C. And 5A2 also? Is that the one we want to take up also? I don't understand what this means.
So you're going to take up 7C immediately following 5A2.
5A2. So we take up 5A2, and then take up 7C, and then we're going to take up 6D. Is that the concept we have here?
Following 7D.
This is confusing. This is confusing. This right here is kind of confusing to me. So we're not doing 7D, right? So we're going to move 6D back behind 7D, but we're not doing 7D.
Can I make a suggestion? Let's do one of them at a time. Just one change to the agenda.
All right, so we moved 6A immediately already, right? That was moved. Any opposition? Okay, so that passes. 6A will be handled immediately. We're going to then take up 7C following 5A2. All right, so any opposition to that? None. All right, so we'll do that next. Then we will take up 6D following 7D.
7C.
All right, 7C. Lisa. So we're going to take up 6D following 7D. Any opposition to that? No opposition. Motion passes. So, then we're going to move to take item 5A1 at noon, or immediately following the completion of 6A1, if later than noon. And what is, can you just explain briefly what this is for? Is this because we're taking Ms. Plunkett
Yes.
at noon?
Yes.
All right, so any opposition to that? No opposition. All right. So, Ms. Plunkett, I know you're here. We're going to meet with you at noon. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll probably be here for the whole meeting. I haven't
All right.
been for a while, so whenever.
Okay. So we're going to move as quickly as we can to get you timely in and out of here. Any opposition to that motion?
No.
No opposition? So moved. I don't know if we need seconds for all these, but I assume that we'll just consider them being seconded. All right. Now, let's take up item 6A, because that's what we're going to do immediately. Can you describe 6A, Ms. Ennis?
Yes. If you remember some time ago, the Assembly had come to the board about changing the election date from April to November. And we spent a tremendous amount of time with that as a conflict of interest. It was eventually passed pursuant to, with some respect of the Ethics Board opinion that says, hey, because there is an intervening election cycle, and because that election date change would not be effective until November 2017, that's how we were going to manage that conflict. That the Assembly members voting to extend their terms otherwise would be a conflict of interest. It was a substantial financial interest. But having an intervening election cycle was able to manage that conflict. With that, the Assembly did pass an ordinance that changed the election dates from April to November. The municipal election dates, obviously, as of November 2017. Assemblymember Flynn has now introduced legislation which would repeal that ordinance in its entirety. So it would return election dates back to April. So I actually raised the issue, well, we probably ought to be looking at the ethics opinion to see, do we have the same problem here? Because you're sort of the question in the reverse. Assembly council and others said, oh no, a diminution in term, a diminution in value, financial interest could not possibly raise a conflict of interest. You'll notice in this that this is a draft opinion that I primarily worked on with the help of Glenda. Says, wait a minute, you can't have a conflict of interest analysis based on vote. That if someone voted not to repeal this, the election date change, then they were voting to keep their term at the level it was. They're voting in their own self-interest. That could be deemed substantial financial interest and a conflict of interest. Versus the argument that if they voted in favor of the repeal, which resulted in the diminution of their term, then that can't be a conflict of interest because it's a lessening of their benefits. We note that in this opinion that we don't think that's very good logic, that in fact this opinion, the opinion we wrote, does still apply to this situation. But however, there again remains an intervening election cycle which manages the conflict. Because this was only effective in 2017, and now so we're going to, if the Assembly votes on this, they would undo the 2017. It would go back to the way it was. So at any rate, if you read this quick draft, that's all we're trying to say is, hey, we do think it could have been a conflict issue, but the same way that it was addressed in the first time around, in our opinion, is applicable to this situation as well.
Provided we have an election next April, right, Barbara? I'm sorry, so you couldn't see her.
So could I address a couple of things that he said? Just one, I think overall that's a great summary, thank you. The one thing I did want to point out is that the clerk, so I was the one that requested the ethics opinion, not the Assembly, and that was the prior opinion that you addressed. I would also agree that Dee raised the issue and that other people did not necessarily think that it was necessary to get an ethics opinion. That's correct. One of the issues that the Assembly members raised was first, they wanted to be able to rely on the prior ethics opinion that you issued, which, as Dee mentioned, was the opposite of this, so that the Assembly doesn't have to come for an advisory opinion every time that, they would be hamstrung if every time they had an ethics issue, they had to come to the Board of Ethics. And at the last meeting of the Ethics and Election Committee, which is meeting at noon, Mr. Hall asked for an informal opinion. And that's why I'm hopefully here to hear that before I run off to that meeting. Unfortunately, I would argue that there is not an intervening election cycle. There is an election in April, but the problem is current members' terms have been extended. So this wouldn't apply. If you did go to an intervening election cycle, you would be saying that they could extend, that they could change it in 2018. So as a practical matter, that would mean we'd have an April election if this passed, April election 2016, November election 2017, April election 2018. So just to let you know, that's the practical import of it.
Am I correct that 5 of the members will be up in 2016, 5 or 6, and then the other 5 or 6 will be up in 2017?
November of 2017.
So 5 or 6 members will be up for re-election in April 2016,
Correct.
and then another.
Well, it's either, it's 5 on one and 6 on the
And
other.
I believe it
So
is
it's
5 on the
6
first.
It's 6 on 2016 and 5 in 2017.
And I believe it's reversed, but
Flip it backwards.
yeah.
It could, yeah, I could have it.
I've been many times.
And by the way, the importance of that reverse is because they could get around it by saying those 6, if they had a quorum in the 2016 group, if it wasn't, well, anyway, because of the way the numbers break out, we can't avoid the issue.
Yeah, the 2016 election, it would presumably only shield the folks who are actually up for election in 2016. So if it's 6 instead of 5, that's important, right? That gives you, at least those 6 could
Yeah.
now consider moving the 2017 election. The folks, it is true, the folks up in the 2017 election, they would at least have a conflict of interest in considering that matter.
I'm sorry if I could jump in here. One of the things that I will tell you that was discussed at one of the meetings is that the assembly still makes the decision whether or not they have a conflict, and the Board of Ethics opinion is advisory.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So one of the comments that came up from a state legislator when we were talking about this the first time is they said, and I don't know, you guys may have discussed it, but if everyone has a conflict in state law, then nobody essentially has a conflict. I don't really I've not read it, so I don't know what that means, but what implication does that have on your decision? So, for example, if the assembly, if the Board of Monuments comes forward and says, you guys need a raise, I mean, how does, if everybody has a conflict, how does the assembly make a decision if you're conflicted? Does that weigh on your decision?
Because we didn't find any authority for that. It's called the rule of necessity.
Mhm.
And so we just don't have that at the municipal level, and I don't know what they have at the state level.
Okay.
I think it should be in here.
We do actually have it at the municipal level, because Dennis has argued it, Katumanis has argued it, and Hensley has argued it, that the assembly members have a duty to certify the election even though they were being elected. So that happens when 6 of them ran for election. If they're all incumbents, they have a conflict in certifying the election that they ran in, but that was an example of the duty of necessity.
Oh, is Patrick Flynn, is he up for re-election in 16 or 17? 'Cause you might remember the technical problem that we had was the question, could even someone sponsor the ordinance, right, and bring it up without having it? So
Patrick's termed out.
you're right. I mean, it's like the
Patrick
assembly.
is termed out, that's right.
He's termed out though.
Yes.
Oh.
He's termed out. Okay, so because that was the problem, right? You couldn't even sponsor the ordinance to bring it to the point where you could disclose to the assembly potential conflicts and then start dealing with those conflicts, right? And so you'd be in violation of the code without the ability of the assembly to even say that you don't have that conflict.
Because bringing it forward was an official action. Right?
That's right.
So
That you would be doing prior to disclosure to the assembly, because you couldn't disclose something to the assembly until you had actually sponsored the ordinance, right?
Mhm.
But it seems like in this case, if Mr. Flynn is termed out, then it would seem to me he doesn't have a conflict in at least sponsoring and bringing forward the ordinance. And at that point, Barbara, you're right. I mean, I think at that point, then assembly members can disclose to the assembly what conflicts they may or may not have, and it would ultimately be up to the assembly whether their conflict is substantial or not.
Who seconded it?
I don't know that, it was just introduced on the consent agenda, so I don't know the answer to that.
And we have argued and gone around and around about the rule of necessity, so it's not in code in municipal levels, whether it deserves some attention. I think we did enough research last time around the Department of Law that's certainly not in contradiction to anything in the state. And right now, it's just sort of a nebulous common law, rule of law that floats in and out. And that we had brought up a number of examples last time about things that required the assembly members to technically touch something that affected them. And, so it may be that a paragraph code change and I don't know whether it'd be part of the new rewrite or not, but a paragraph code change that provides a little bit of standards. I mean, that's the problem with the rule of necessity is it doesn't have any standards. We see it happening, but it doesn't have any standards. And maybe this is one of those that you say, hey, the rule of necessity we think would probably apply. We'll defer to later code, give it to the assembly to make their decision, because it is so similar to when they have to vote on other matters that touch them. And it's pretty attenuated.
You're not gonna give your famous comment that made it into the press?
That's a conflict of interest.
No, this is what it was. Your quote, your words were, well, what could be a greater conflict of interest than this? That's how you started out that meeting with the press.
Starting big, right?
Yeah, there's our chair. Okay, now let's have our meeting to discuss this.
As in the last case, I'd be inclined not to think of this as a necessity matter. Precisely what month of the year the election falls in, I can't see how that's an act of necessity.
Okay.
Akin to saying certifying the election, right? In which case you would have no government officials and you couldn't certify the election.
Okay, I don't think it's the act that's a necessity. It's the fact that you need people to vote is the necessity.
Yeah, but do you need people to vote in November as opposed to April?
No, they need people to.
You know what I'm saying? So,
Assembly, right?
yeah, so voting on laws that establish that there is an election, no doubt. Voting on laws on when the election is held, 1 month as opposed to another month, I don't think that's a necessity.
Okay, but again, I think the necessity does not go as to whether the legislation is important or not. It's that you have enough people to vote at all. I mean, again, we're put in a sort of a conundrum here that if we take this literally, we may have a problem. We don't have the intervening cycle to rely on, apparently, except if we do what you're talking about, is saying the people who are termed out. And I think there's quite a few, actually, who are termed out.
Well, again, that was the recommendation that we had the last time, right? Was just you just set the date of the effective change of this far enough in the future. Ideally, it'd be far enough in the future that all the assembly members would face at least one re-election cycle or be termed out before it took effect.
Which was the timing of the current change, the current change we're under right now. We set up far enough so it didn't affect. I don't believe it affected any current.
Well, but Assembly member Flynn would not be termed out technically until November, right? So he still currently would be voting on a period of time that would affect his term, whether he's termed out afterwards or not.
He's the other voting to truncate his term or not.
Exactly.
So it's
I'm
kind
sorry.
of odd because basically the question that you're posing, or one way that I'm going to look at it, is it's not a conflict if you vote yes, but it is a conflict if you vote no. I mean, that's a very odd.
That is, and I wouldn't put it that way. I'd say you have the conflict of interest because you're in a situation in which you are considering how to vote when you have a substantial personal and private interest in the matter, regardless of which way you vote. So conflict of interest isn't necessarily the decision that you make, it's the condition under which you're making decisions.
You face the decision.
That's right.
You're judging your own case.
That's right.
I think it's just more obvious. I agree with you, but I think it's more obvious, you know, a more painfully aware conflict if you're extending your term rather than, I think the response is, well, how could it be conflicting if you're truncating your term? Because it's, you know, you're not extending something that you have pecuniary interest in. But the analysis to me is essentially the same. And I think there may be some presumption at certain levels that individuals will all vote to extend or they will now all vote to shorten. And that I don't think that that's a fair presumption to make. I don't think that's our job either as the board, is to presume how a vote will come out.
But I do wonder, in sponsoring yours, so just talk about the act of sponsorship, right? Is there a conflict in the act of merely sponsoring an ordinance that would truncate your term? Right, because you're just bringing it up for official consideration on the part of the assembly, right? At least it seems to me that there's no conflict there. And again, I think what the code lets you do is, once it's sort of ethically on the assembly's plate The assembly has the power to disclose to one another their
Mhm.
potential conflicts and determine if those conflicts are substantial.
Because the sponsorship is not facing a decision one way or the other. It's proposing a certain direction.
That's right. Whereas we had said
And-
before, sponsorship of an ordinance to extend one's term
Right.
was a conflict.
Right.
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 But to truncate it, right, I don't think so. Right now, about voting on whether to truncate it or not, well, now you're the judge in your own case, and I
Mhm.
think that becomes the conflict.
So it sounds like, in summary, we have, this came to us not by the Assembly, because the Assembly believes that by truncating, the concept here is that there's not a need to
No.
bring in this,
Members of the Assembly,
Members of the
Assembly
Assembly.
Council believe that.
believe that there's no reason to bring it to the Board of Ethics, because this is not, because our previous decision is not applicable to this scenario, because it's truncating what the proposal is, and the reason it was brought to us by the clerk's office or by whomever, is because the concept, and this is your opinion, I believe, yours and Glenda, is that what?
With this one here,
That right
it was
there?
primarily me and
Okay,
Glenda.
and the concept there is that the logic does apply, that we cannot, that the prior decision from the board, the logic still applies to this. But that doesn't mean that there can't be an intervening election or a calculation perhaps of the number of people who can vote for this that would eliminate that conflict. Is that the concept?
I would say it's an important detail how many assembly members precisely are up for re-election.
Or whether
Would
it
you like
needs
me to
to,
get that?
If you don't mind, because if they have if
Right.
it is 6,
It's 5.
it is 5.
I looked
okay.
it up, it's
Oh,
5.
okay. Well, then that's.
so then the answer, then our recommendation based on our prior logic would be that they would have to be following the 2017?
But see, the problem is then you have an election
Right.
in
Remember,
2017, and then, yeah.
Right, I mean,
so
that
it
sounds-
it doesn't work.
Right.
So let's say 5 people, so we need one more person. Is there any way to do a workout with respect to?
Because I would really like,
One more
in
person.
6 minutes, to come up with a recommendation, not just there's some way that we
So
can
we have-
propose to resolve this issue.
So we have
First of all,
5
this-
plus Flynn, who's terming out. So is that the thing?
Mhm.
It's 5 getting reelected plus
Plus-
are there folks being
Well,
termed
there's
out?
5 who are up for election this coming April,
Okay.
and then 6.
I'm trying to think of which Jennifer Johnston's termed out and Ernie Hall's not running.
Oh, really? But he's already in the group. Is there anyone, Amy, in the second group, in the 2017 group?
Well, let me tell you who's up in 2016. I'm up. Jennifer Johnston's turned out. Paul Honeman is up. Ernie Hall is not running again. And that's West Anchorage. I'm missing Dick Trainee. He's up. And he can run again. Those are the 5 that are up in 2016.
So,
Now in 2017, Patrick Flynn's turned out. Bill Starr is turned out. Tim Steele will run again. Pete Peterson will run again. And Bill Evans will run again. And Ellie Gray Jackson's turned out. So you have a mixed bag
Mhm.
on both sides. People who are turned out versus people
Mhm.
who
Right, and quorum is 6 for the assembly. It's a majority.
it is.
so, maybe the conflict for those who are in 2070 that are termed out is de minimis or something. I mean, I still would go with the rule of necessity, but that's a code change. By the way, and this whole thing is not a rush. They came up and,
The clerk and I winked at each other. I think somebody's going to be introducing the rule of necessity for that change
oh, good.
soon.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, then why don't we put this on hold? I mean, why are we wasting our time?
And they
Quite
probably
frankly.
will ask you to help draft it too. It
That
might
would
just
be
make
an interesting
your
assignment,
role
because
easier.
It's true that the rule of necessity can't really depend on the character of the item being discussed, because that would be a really difficult one.
Uh-huh.
Then we get questions of the sort, is this alcohol ordinance
Right.
necessary for anyone to consider? Is this housing ordinance necessary for anyone to consider? So, what do you come?
Exactly. When you were discussing it, that's
We'd
what
be
I'm
starting
thinking.
to ask for
But the
the
other
salary.
thing you have to remember is, it's not just about what the item is, it's those people sitting in those seats are representing 50,000 people. So someone could argue the necessity is that representation of that demographic or that.
Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
But it can't be so broad that you just simply say any
Right.
law about elections is based on, is necessity, right? Because then the assembly is supposed to cancel the 2017 election and extend their term by 2-3 years, and there's no conflict of interest in doing so because it's an election law. Right, I mean, so it can't be so broad that it can't be a blank check in a whole area.
Sorry.
You're right, I wonder if it can be
Right.
case by case. Yeah, maybe this is why we,
So what that sheet probably doesn't show is who's turning out though. Right?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, does it?
I'm sorry, I didn't give you a copy. It does.
So I guess the question then becomes whether we put this whole thing on hold and wait, or whether we at least give them an idea, the assembly, an idea that we believe that our logic does apply to it in some way, that we think that there should be some application of the prior decision that we had that should be considered when putting together the legislation.
I would agree with that if I could make the question slightly different, and that would be that Mr. Hall asked for an informal opinion, and so the option would be to allow me to report to him, if you would, that the ethics board thinks that it's going to require a formal opinion, and it looks like D's is more akin to a formal opinion, so you would
Okay.
need more time. I will tell you that there is some concern about timing, which
Mhm.
is part of the reason why I think Lisa has rearranged the agenda. The assembly members were looking for the marijuana decision, you know, that Mr. Trainee asked your advice about, and that was an item from 2014. And so there is some concern that that the board isn't issuing its decisions as quickly as the assembly needs those responses, or so that they could rely on your prior decisions to make future decisions. So I can let you know that there has been some concern expressed about that.
I have to say, I think that's a reliance issue, that this board went out of their way to bring Mr. Trainee in and talk to him about that resolution, met with him numerous times, as we have done with Amy as well. So I think it's a reliance issue, personally, that this board has been nothing but responsive to assembly people.
Well,
I think
he got the decision now, whether we wrote up something.
No, that went back and forth because basically our decision is the code is so problematic that we could not say that in good conscience that behavior, that resolution was prohibited, and there are a lot of things that support it. First Amendment rights, the duties of an assembly person. So it's difficult to write that opinion that says this code is so problematic that even though we think it's partisan, we also respect the fact that assembly people, this is what they do, they're policymakers. But I guess I am taking it personally because we have rarely responded to assembly people.
That is correct. I was asked by Mr.
I don't
Trainee-
feel that way.
I was asked by Mr. Trainee to get that opinion because he wanted to rely on it for something else. So
Right.
he is
Exactly.
absolutely correct.
Sure. No, I think
And-
it's the nature of what we're trying to do. We're trying to be very deliberate, and we're trying to get all the information we can and work within a code that is not always easy to interpret. And we really do work hard to get one that goes out that is then something that can be relied on in the future without having to do revisions later. I think it's going to be a natural tension, and I get it. I understand why you're taking it personally, and I understand why they want it faster. I think that will be a constant tension no matter how many members we have, no matter how many times we meet. I think that we'll always be kind of running up against that. But part of it too is we really appreciate being involved. This is also new for the board to a certain extent because we haven't always been this involved in the assembly matters. So this is an evolution that just takes time.
Would you like me to throw fuel on the fire?
Dude.
Uh-oh.
You know, it's 12 and it's time for me to go, and it's Ms. Plunkett's turn. You spend too much time on gift disclosures. So
Barbara, can I have the draft?
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
being a little bit facetious,
Yeah.
but I think you do know that, and that's.
Well, we've been working on that, right? We're
The draft, could I get that
we're
back?
trying.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's why we had the code changes.
I
and everything,
was
so-
being somewhat
Yeah.
facetious. I didn't mean to be disrespectful.
Okay, so do we have?
Can I ask two quick questions?
Yeah.
So, the first being, it sounds like we do have one potential solution for them, which is not very satisfactory, which is to keep it all the way up to 18.
Yeah.
Then you'd have
Mhm.
one election that bounced into November, and then it would truncate back to April. So we may pass that along, and it may be of no interest to them whatsoever to have one floating election and then pull it back, but that seems like something the previous logic would totally.
I think we would all agree, as unfavorable as that would be, that would work, that would satisfy. the
Ethically,
logic.
that would be okay.
That would be.
Hey, and I'll be
yeah.
honest, it might not be a bad idea. It might turn out that, who was it? Was it Mr. Starr saying, you know, maybe you hold it in November and 60% of the electorate turns out, just like
Right.
people were saying would happen, and then you think, oh, whoa, actually, you know something?
Yeah, right.
Never mind. Forget the April elections.
So
Right.
that's one, and then this is a remedial question, but I wasn't on the board when we were addressing this on the first go round. Could somebody just clarify for me, how does the disabling conflict of interest actually play out? So the elected officials aren't encumbered by 25B that says they can't participate.
Can I make a suggestion? We let Barbara go, because I think this is a different.
No, I wanna.
Oh, okay,
hear
okay,
this, so.
okay.
So 25B is the rule that applies to municipal employees to say they cannot participate in an official action in which they have a disqualifying conflict of interest. And then 35C requires the elected officials to make a disclosure, but it's actually kind of, looking at it in the room just now, more ambiguous as to how that really plays out. It refers to the presiding officer making a parliamentary ruling and then having a member's request to be excused ruled on by the majority vote of the body. But what did we say when this came up the first go-round? We said everyone would have a disqualifying conflict of interest that they would have to disclose, and no one would be able to rule on it, and that was the problem?
Yes, I think so. I'm sorry, Con. I think that's what we said.
Mhm.
We have that opinion here. I can make copies for you too, so, because we got all the opinions.
But
Well, remember,
just
part-
to cinch
yeah.
that all the way up then, if everybody had a disqualifying conflict of interest, and everybody disclosed it, and then the parliamentarian or the
Mhm.
chair of the assembly said, everybody's voting anyway, is that a violation of the ethics code? Because it looks to me like it's not.
The problem with the last case was because there was a blanket conflict of interest, even sponsorship of the ordinance would potentially be in conflict, right? Because you'd be sponsoring it before you disclosed and had the body review whether you had a conflict to sponsor,
Okay.
right? And so there was a
So there was a
bootstrapping
violation
problem.
that you didn't ever make the disclosure ahead.
That's right. There was a bootstrapping problem. That's why I wonder in this case it might be sort of key that if you can get someone, and it might, as it turns out, not be someone who's termed out. It might really need to be someone who's facing re-election in 2016 to at least sponsor it, and that gets you around the bootstrapping problem. At least now it's on the Assembly's table,
Mhm.
and then it might be the case that disclosure and having either the body or the presiding officer determine each conflict.
I think that's, I'm sorry to interrupt, but a very good point, is putting
Mhm.
your 2 points together.
Right.
You have someone who doesn't have a conflict sponsor it, and then rely on parliamentary procedure for the balance of it.
And it might still be the case that everyone, the majority would have a disqualifying conflict, but it seems like it's still vested within the assembly to
Mhm.
say, notwithstanding that conflict,
Mhm.
everybody go ahead and the voters can vote you out of office if they think you did something great.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the one
Mhm.
wrinkle might be, depending on like how far into the weeds you want to go with it, is that you might face an infinite regress in the sense that if someone discloses, I have this conflict, okay, can the body consider whether the conflict
Right.
is substantial?
Right.
Well, first,
Right.
we all have to disclose that we
Right.
have the exact same conflict. Okay, who's going to vote on that? Well, maybe the presiding officer. Well, of course, he's going to have to disclose that he has exactly the same conflict. Okay, he discloses that. Now who considers whether his conflict to consider the conflict of the
Mhm.
conflict, and I don't see where that stops, right? I
But
mean,
once everyone has disclosed that everybody suffers from the same conflict, it seems like our ethics rules run up to the line of requiring disclosure for the elected officials and then pull back.
That's right.
All we are requiring is that everybody knows what people are bringing to the table.
Because they determine their own conflicts.
Right.
Right.
Well, it
I
doesn't.
think
I don't think it requires just disclosure. I mean, it doesn't. Someone has to determine if the matter is not substantial, right?
C3 requires the presiding officer to exercise parliamentary authority, and then C6 goes on to say our jurisdiction is limited
Right.
to figuring out if the disclosure was adequate.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so the question is, if you fall into this infinite regress, right, that the presiding officer, so what is the presiding officer now has to disclose? I have a conflict in determining whether these other people have a conflict. And then who votes on that? I mean, who makes that? Does the presiding officer determine for themselves if it's okay? Or does the body have to vote on the presiding officer's conflict? Now, of course, they will have to then redisclose again that they have a conflict in even considering his conflict in considering their original conflict. And on and on. Now, with the danger only being the following, let's say if they just go ahead and they vote, someone files a notice of potential violation saying that disclosure was insufficient. Is that citizen right to complain? Maybe, right? Because the situation at this point is so deep into the weeds. Maybe they're right, maybe they're, and I think the Assembly was uncomfortable with that idea that, unlike a typical case where, let's suppose 7 people were facing re-election next year, no problem, you just have those 7 make the determination about the conflicts of everyone else. You're good to go.
But isn't there somewhere else in the code where it says the Ethics Board doesn't second guess the Assembly's determination of conflict of interest?
That's right. Only the sufficiency of the disclosure. But the problem is if you have disclosure if you have a requirement for disclosure after disclosure after disclosure after disclosure, that anytime anyone needs to consider someone else's conflict, they need to disclose yet again that they have a conflict.
This seems awfully,
It's more process than substance. There's got to be a way where everyone in the room can say, me too, me too, me too, me too, and then...
That's right.
I would say it's a process that reflects a substantive point, that at the end of the day,
Barbara?
It may be unavoidable, but strictly speaking, it is unethical for people to vote on matters in which they have a substantial conflict of interest. And we may have to just swallow it sometimes. And I think this sort of like logical paradox is just created because you have these ethical rules that have been set up to prevent conflicts of interest. And when the conflict of interest is pretty extreme, there's going to be no real way of getting around it.
Barbara? Yes.
I would like to excuse myself, but I would make a comment. I know that Keith used to call Terry Herr Professor, and I would suggest that we are in a philosophical conundrum here. But one of my law professors used to say, when you went down that road, the dog will limp. And that you can just what if it to death. And I think
true.
that's what. But thank you very much. I think my instructions from you are to report to the Assembly Elections and Ethics Committee that the board, I believe, would like to issue a formal opinion. Is that correct?
Okay.
Go ahead, Dee.
I'm not sure that's correct. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that we
Okay,
can't
then the
say.
answer is unknown. May I just say that there...
Can we
that
give
there
you a
was-
different answer?
Yeah.
You get,
Okay,
sure.
could the answer be that as long as the sponsorship, and I don't know, where does Assemblymember Flynn fit in this world?
2017.
So he's one of the problem ones, actually. If the sponsorship
Is one of the
people who's up for election next in 2016, that one, we do find the logic and the rationale does apply of that reason, of that opinion. But number 2 is if someone from 2016, I don't know at this point, if it's too late, co-sponsors or something, that then it would be up to the Assembly under the conflict rules to make their own determination.
I think that
Look
I
at
feel
that.
comfortable making that
I think
recommendation.
that's about right.
Yeah.
So I may feel a little uncomfortable trying to communicate that to them, so could we just let them know that the board believes that there is potential ethical conflict, and could we...
Well, how about if one of us goes in there and just says that?
I can run upstairs really fast and come back.
Okay.
We're on
There's actually
155.
What?
Downstairs.
Yeah, I know. Downstairs.
Yeah.
Okay. I will excuse
We
myself
can-
briefly and be right back.
Well, you can take over the meeting for...
All right, excellent. All right. So do we have a motion to remove David as chairperson? Easy.
I like this board.
All too easy. Perhaps he is not as strong as the emperor has foreseen. Okay, let's take a look. Lisa, is there sort of pro forma stuff that we could do? How about some of these? Let's look at the minutes, right?
Well,
Or was there other stuff that we wanted to do?
Kathleen?
Kathleen Plunkett. Kathleen, come on up to the table.
I can stay if you want to wait for David to come back. I'm
No,
here
because
for-
we know he's in accordance with what you want to
Okay.
discuss here.
Okay.
In fact, when you look at our current disclosures, I think you can see the issue here.
Okay, Kathleen, thank you so much for coming. I'm Terry Kelly. I don't know if we've met.
Kathleen Plunkett, nice to meet you. I think I met you either.
Hi, I'm Glenda. Nice to meet you.
These are the current disclosures that everyone has in the packet that they'll be able to
Tab,
get.
are we on? What tab are we at, Lisa?
We're on 5A1, so it's the green, gifts for employees, the bright green.
I didn't introduce myself to Kathleen because her husband and I graduated high school together a long time ago.
Short time ago, short time ago.
That's right.
Sometimes it seems like a long time.
And we worked on
Yeah,
this
please.
last year, the year before.
Yeah.
My chair, but that's somehow
There's a thing.
I know, it seems to be doing nothing. It's probably indicating I should have had chips.
The instantaneous effect, right?
Yes, Dave.
Okay, guys. I would like you to admonish that side of the table, please. Okay, and it's okay to call you Kathleen?
Yes.
Okay, Kathleen, we wanted someone from the school board to come back again, and yes, you were through the process where it took us a year to get all the gift rules changed, and I thought they turned out pretty well, and very respectful of teachers. And what we found in response to that is that, in fact, the volume has decreased dramatically of these disclosure forms, so it's saving the school districts some time, it's saving us time. So dramatic improvement. We have a couple problem areas, which is why we want to discuss with you. One is we continue to get the wrong forms, and so we're concerned with sort of training. We understand the principals sort of, or at least we were sort of told, run their I don't want to call it a fiefdom, but they run their areas. We don't know about the centralized. And why the forms matters, because the old forms you disclosed everything. The new forms, you don't disclose hardly anything unless it comes outside of the safe harbors, which were designed to be pretty comprehensive. And so we want teachers not to have to fill out forms for everything. The old forms also sort of imply, well, if you disclose, everything's okay. What the new form says is you fall within these safe harbors, you're fine, but if you don't use that gift. So that message is probably not getting across to people, because we're getting still some pretty large gifts. And of course, by the time we get them a month later, the forms, those gifts are already used. And so that was another issue, is just making sure people get the correct forms. Sort of the bent on this. I think we got from, I don't know who at the school district sent us something that said what the teachers get. And it's from their old policy, really. It hasn't changed, I don't think.
The policy changed.
Did it change from?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the wrong thing.
So, and then this is, I just brought only one copy, but this is the, they get yearly training.
Okay.
And you're
Oh,
welcome.
no, so this is good, okay.
Yeah, they get
Great.
yearly training, and then they have that one form that even has the link, and that was one of my questions. The wrong form, that kind of, well, that's always been a pet peeve of mine in my regular job, is people put an old form on their desktop, and that's what they end up using. And I'm wondering if that's what's done, and that was kind of what I went back to Todd with, to go, do we need to, even though we have had the training yearly, we pass it out, it's out there, and it has the link right to the muni website, and they send an email as well every year, they're still using the wrong form?
I imagine it probably is the secretary of the school that has it on their desktop. When the teacher goes to them, they're putting it up from there.
You
That's
know,
my guess,
I
is
hadn't
that-
thought about that,
And
so I
does the
wonder.
secretary go to the class?
Everyone's supposed to go to the class because secretaries are employees as well. Everyone's supposed to take the training. But that might be a thought to emphasize not only the principals, but the admin.
Yeah, that might just be the missing link there.
That could be the missing link, because I was
Okay.
trying to ferret that out
That's assuming
before
that
as well.
not all the teachers would keep these things on their desktop.
Well, I would hope not,
So do I.
yeah.
But again, Kathleen, things have
Yeah.
improved dramatically. We're just trying to clean up this last little
Yeah.
bit. And then I think the other thing that would happen is if we have a concern about a gift, so that it actually does disclose a gift, and I got a $100, we still keep getting SPA gifts, $150 to SPAs. It's pretty regular over the limit gift. How to contact that teacher. Pre this rule, I forget the gentleman's name who was the Torgensen? I can't remember his name. Anyway,
Tolson.
What was it?
Collison, Ed Tolson.
Oh, yeah. he had said, well, just send it to a letter from the board to the school district. And they would get it to the teacher. Well, what was happening, they were getting open, they're theoretically confidential, that really upset the teachers, and so we said, wait a minute, we're just trying to notify teachers in the least dramatic fashion. The one or two teachers we had come in here ended up in tears, and the board isn't about that, it's more of an educational thing. Of course, one of them had a $1,000 pass on an airplane, so it's just a bad situation. So we're just trying to figure out the the nicest way to get, if we have a letter, to get it to the teacher without it being in their school mailbox and being opened by staff. And I think these will continue to go way down, personally. So that was one of our issues.
If you're worried about letter-wise, maybe you want, I'm just thinking to add to the form, the personal address of the teacher. And we also have I did not bring policy, sorry.
Now, these are all
But we
public
changed-
record, these
Yeah.
forms, so do
Oh.
they want their addresses out?
I think we discussed that last time,
Maybe,
didn't
I'm
we?
not sure.
Yeah, I think we did discuss it because of the public record aspect.
So maybe that's
But
just
right
something.
now, when it's a wrong form, it ends up going to the principal. It goes back to the principal, and the teacher may be gone. So it's already not going direct to the.
Clerk's office, I mean, ultimately, they're supposed to, I think, be filed with the clerk, these forms.
Well, when they come to us, they're filed with the clerk when they're the correct form. And there's incorrect forms in here, just listen now.
What Kathleen is saying, the forms are coming into us, but if it's the wrong form or any other reason, or, we have told some to return, that goes to the principal, and then the principal gives the information to the teacher.
Right.
That's what we're doing now.
But it doesn't go to the principal and try to go to the.
Not both. Our letter's dependent on the principal conveying
Right.
the information.
Right.
It's actually, didn't we also say that the principal could approve to some level?
Well, there could be, and I don't know if AST has followed through with this, that if the gifts are outside of the guidelines, that an ethics officer or the ethics board could approve them if they comported with conflict of interest and,
But they weren't supposed to use it before. They were
Right.
supposed to.
But whether
Yeah, that's
the-
what we discussed
That's the
before.
big key.
That's the
Sort
big
of like
key.
set it aside,
Yes,
and if
yes,
you're not sure,
that's
set
the
it
big key.
aside.
And I
right.
think when we first said a school district ethics officer, there was actually, it might have been one of the meetings you were at, there was actually kickback. And we're like, well, why give that to us? And now we need an administrative policy. And he said, well, we're just trying to be gracious and let you handle your own matters. Because the principal, I would hope, would say no to a $1,000 gift pass. But it begs the question was, did ASD ever appoint their own ethics officer?
I think we're, per the way and I'd have to go back and look at the regs. I thought the way it ended up being written is that only ethics officer, and since it's really a muni ordinance, is just the municipality.
Well,
Yeah.
we have theoretically
Yeah.
ethics officers within different departments. So I wonder if we appointed someone an ethics officer at the school district and just worked with them a little bit, and then that person would have much better.
Well, didn't we write that? Wasn't that written into the code that there was that
Yeah.
latitude?
Yes,
So
exactly.
yeah, I guess you could look at working it through that angle, and I'd probably work that with Todd Hess. He's the one that's in that position
Mhm.
now. And I did share to him I was coming. He says to the meeting, but he had something else going on. And I can certainly pass on to him that piece too.
So
but
would
that
it,
was his thing was why go to the school principal and not the employee?
just so
with
he
the
knows,
wrong forms.
because
Yeah.
historically, when we
Well,
tried to
it
do that, it
represents a
didn't work.
quality control problem, I think, and so I think that was why Lisa and I discussed, if we're getting the wrong form from maybe an individual or from a particular school.
That I never thought about it being a secretary or an admin.
Right,
That's
it's, I mean, our take on it was that maybe the principal needs to be made aware of it if it's something that's pervasive.
Yeah. But potentially it delays it getting to the teacher.
But, I mean, but our hope was that the principal would get it and go, oh, well, Susie did this on the wrong form, I'm gonna go give it back to her and say, hey, please be sure you check the ASD website, because I've been to you guys, the website's great, and you've got the links and all of that, it's just a matter of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we did adopt the policy and change that in time because
Right.
I came in as policy chair and I adopted it. Got it adopted just in time.
So is there a way that we could send it to both the principal and the teacher? So is that something that we can just?
Well,
and
it's that-
But can you do it without publishing their personal address?
It could just be sent in care of the school. and
But-
put in
but
their
that's what we did
individual
that
mailbox,
last
but
time that ended up
goes
such a
back,
mess.
Yeah.
Because somebody opened it.
No, but we can't prevent that if
Yeah.
staff are opening teachers' mail.
We could call them at the phone number and ask for it. That way it doesn't show up as a public record.
Is the phone number on that form?
Yeah, but it looks like a generic. It
It's
looks
the
like a
generic. Some of these,
generic.
most of the generic
Yeah.
school number. Yeah.
School number from looking at the ones I'm looking at. So I don't know that would, maybe if it's only the wrong forms that end up going to the principal, maybe you just say, hey, this is the process when it's the wrong form. Because then what it means to me is the principal should, and maybe it needs to be, shouldn't have to be added to procedure, but maybe it needs to be added to a separate procedure that the principal needs to investigate where that wrong form came from. And what is the wrong form? Is it the old one
The
from
old one.
before?
That's one of
Oh,
the-
okay, that was the one
Just an
thing.
outdated.
Because I didn't
Yeah.
see that there to be able to tell. So the wrong form was the old one, which means it has to be on somebody's
Yeah.
desktop.
I think that's what's happening. I mean, I know I do the same thing. I've got a bunch of forms, like for submitting this and submitting that to university. And gosh, yeah, every now and then one gets kicked back to me and say, hey, we updated this 10 years ago.
We've tolerated you up to this point.
That's right.
Okay.
We've had enough. Please don't submit
Well, I've
forms
done
written
it
in
for
Latin
10 years.
anymore.
I guess when we did the gift rewrite, I really envisioned that there would be potentially an ASD ethics officer that we could carefully train and would have infinitely better relationship with staff. And the first five things they ever got, then we could work with them, or I could work with them, and almost get us out of that process. Now, maybe you're saying, well, geez, now that would introduce yet a new person, a new direction that people need to learn to turn to. And if you call someone over there an ethics officer, then they're going to get asked 50 other questions. So maybe Todd Hess was very hesitant about
Oh, I know
really
he was.
pushed back.
I know he was.
So
He didn't want any changes to the form at all, if you remember. So,
But is he not now the designated ethics officer for ASD?
I don't.
When I called
Is he?
ASD, that's what I was informed of. So
he very well could be.
Oh, okay.
I didn't ask him that.
Is he the one doing these trainings? And so when the teachers get these trained, they're going through that PowerPoint. Who's doing that?
I don't know who
Principal,
does the
or is
training.
that
I don't know who does the
Okay.
training. I think it's done during the administrative and all of the advances that are the end of August, the end of July that are coming up next month.
Right.
Is when they're done. It's a part of that. But then if you have someone come in separate from that, I mean, and I think maybe just emphasizing, if you have an old form, trash it. Use the link. I mean, that's what I do when I do my own elected official ones, which
Well,
they still have to see.
And
I
that
guess.
form really is aimed at saving time.
Yeah.
You don't have to do all these disclosures any
Yeah.
longer. You don't have to
Turns
send
out,
your
yeah.
stuff to the ethics board
Yeah.
any longer. That we recognize that teacher-parent-child relationship.
I wonder, maybe could we just include something in the PowerPoint presentation that they get as it just like a quick note? Make sure you're
FAQs.
using the correct form. Don't use the form
Yeah.
that's on your, on your desktop. Go to the, then go to the, the website that has the proper link. It maybe just to flag it for teachers might be.
Maybe just look for the word safe harbor. I mean, again, this code was designed to be very user-friendly.
I have a question that's slightly unrelated to the gift disclosure form, but since we have the representative from ASD here, I'm wondering, to what extent do you think that parents are aware of these rules? Because it does seem like sometimes the teachers are getting caught in an uncomfortable situation where the teacher walks in and says, or the parent walks in and says, here's a $100 gift certificate, and they are caught.
Or the PTAs.
Well, it's not an
Those
issue
are
with
okay.
PTA because
Yeah,
that's
right.
coming from a group.
Yeah,
It's usually the individuals.
yeah. But if the PTAs were aware, then the parents would be more aware as well.
But what's the participation in the parents in the PTA? About 10%?
And- Yeah, probably.
They'd probably be gift givers.
Can I, Terry, didn't we at one point ask the school district, I think it was under Carol Como, whether they'd be willing to us to put a paragraph in the parent newsletter?
Mhm.
And didn't we get a no?
Yeah.
The time
But that
before
was
the
under,
snow.
but that was under Carol.
Okay,
that was
but
a
it was
pretty
simple,
basic-
can we put it in your newsletter? And we could do a real nice a nice
You know
thing.
what it could be done, but it doesn't go to all the parents. It would be dependent really on all of the schools when they do their newsletters to include it. So it would really be, so to me, it would be adding it to the procedures. For my 2 cents, that's what I would do, and I will recommend.
You'd want to do it one before Christmas and
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
before the end of the year.
Right,
Didn't
or
you
even,
write
or
on-
even just the
Or
stuff you get
even
at the
in the-
beginning of the year. I
Yeah,
mean,
what about
we
a
got stuff from Rogers Park at the beginning.
Does every individual school have their own school handbook?
We have one main school handbook, but it's really a student handbook. So it's not a parent handbook or a
I see.
teacher handbook.
Didn't you write a couple of these?
I mean, I've been
Well,
given
that's-
handbooks
You could get
before
credit-
at certain
credit,
schools
right?
where not only
Yeah.
was I given it as a parent, but I had to sign and agree to the contents. It's a contract. So, I didn't know if ASD did something kind of along
Well,
that vein.
yes, but it's not going to be for that
I see.
particular type of thing.
Right. It's more like for students to know what's expected of them and.
Yes,
yeah.
it's the student handbook is pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a good part of our policies
Sure.
are the
Right.
student basically rights and responsibilities.
Right.
For lack of a better word.
Okay.
And
But what about at registration? Are there,
It's all online now.
oh, it's all online?
Well, it doesn't
A lot
have
of
to
it's
be, most of
online,
it's
yeah.
online.
Well, maybe that, huh?
Okay. Welcome to the 21st century.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, but this is online too, but maybe it needs to be in more than one place. Or linked.
or linked, there's some kind of a reference to it, because every
Yeah.
parent, I suppose, is gonna, unless kids are registering themselves now, I don't know what's happening anymore.
I think the newsletter solution, if you folks are amenable to it, would be best, because that seems like documents may actually be read, and it would be top of mind when it was critical.
More likely to be read.
More likely.
No better than that, but at
Holidays
least more
and end
likely.
of year.
Because does it even get home to the parents?
But that's what we've been trying, because you're right, the parent side is the other side. And so the ADN, twice over the last 7 years has run articles on
Yeah.
this issue. And so we've been trying to, get it through that way, like just sort of get it in the, the public
Yeah.
debate about not putting teachers in this kind of like, awkward.
So right now, we do an email that basically goes to all the staff. So maybe as a part of that email is to send a note or to ask, and maybe even put it in the procedures, to ask to send a note to the parent and the community as well, because it's not just parents, it's community.
Well, and could
For
we
people that
put
are-
together a paragraph or two, nice, friendly,
Reminders?
thing? No, just a paragraph that they could insert, that we'd suggest that you put this in your newsletter, because then they're not drafting it, or.
That would work.
And it's friendly and nice and 2 paragraphs long.
That's right. And then you can blame us, right? So like, well, here's what the Board of Ethics has recommended that we tell you about gifts,
No,
right?
but it's, I was telling them ahead of time before you got here that at the school my kids go to, my kids go is Polaris, and everybody's already in the know about giving, supplies for $40, and everybody's gotten that down under 50. It's very easy
Yeah.
to give your teacher gifts, just keep it within the boundaries.
Yeah, yeah.
So on this subject, every now and then I like to throw in my parent 2 cents. Because I think it's extremely important to do the what is it called? Newspaper. What is it?
Newsletter.
Newsletter thing.
Yeah.
Because I think the type of parent that is giving gifts is also reading the newsletter. So just that kind of
At least the
involved.
big ones, yeah, right.
And so before I came to work here, I didn't know anything about a $50 cap. I gave gifts to teachers all the time. And now that I'm here, now I know some of my gifts are $50. But I didn't know that because the schools informed me. I only know that because I'm here. So how many parents are out there still, involved doing that kind of thing? And then the newsletter thing, it could be, here's your cat, $50. But I think now, after being on this board and hearing this discussion, it's so much more relevant to give supplies. So it could be even like a suggestion. We suggest that the best gifts are supplies for the classroom, or something like that. Because now I'm thinking my $50 gift card to here or there is probably, I should be doing $50 worth of supplies. But like I said, I only have learned that from being, serving this board, not as a parent. So I would appreciate as a parent it being in the newsletter.
And if somebody must give more, they can give it to the PTA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Problem is, there
or
are some that
anonymously.
don't.
Yeah.
There are some that don't have PTAs, but yeah.
Or to the principal, if
Yeah.
we gave them that.
Yeah, to the principal,
yeah.
just
Yeah.
anonymously as to the teacher.
Yeah.
So do you think, Kathleen, we might be able to do that, get a 2-paragraph suggestion and give it to you, and you can, one of us will write it, it's cheery and happy and great news?
I don't have any issues. I don't have any issues with that. But the other thing that I want to do is have Todd add to the process the wrong form, and I think you can do that with even just an FAQ of mistakes.
Yeah.
Do a page of
Yeah,
what
right.
are you doing wrong, or what could you do wrong, or what are the pitfalls. However you want to, of adding that to that as well.
Yeah, because I think it's just a simple question of flagging it for people.
Yeah.
I think I'm sure people are obviously conscientious in that they're getting a form and they're disclosing, right? And if you just flag for these people, hey, there's a new form, and you might not even have to disclose this
Yeah.
anymore. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So, are you going to relinquish the chairmanship, or are you going to let him?
We voted to remove you from the board.
Happily. No, I'm kidding. No. That's fine. Are we back? Who's in charge? Why don't we just finish this issue? How about that?
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to go through these.
Oh,
so that
was
you
there
could
anything else?
You've
Yeah.
seen them, right?
What were you hoping to do while Kathleen was here about ASD gift disclosure? We've been having a discussion. Some of the remaining little problems that we've been having. We talked a little bit about ways of trying to flag for teachers that there is a new form and that they, have to be using the new form. And we talked a little bit about coming up with some language for parent newsletters going out. And we were told in the past that the school district didn't want to do that, but that was several years ago, and it sounds like people might be more amenable to that now. We talked about.
I am only one person.
Of course, that's right. Yeah,
but I personally don't have any issues.
I think the concept that we have is we're trying to keep these things from us,
Yeah.
right? We want to make sure that obviously if something comes up that is substantial and diamonds are passing hands and mink coats and things like that, that's one thing. But a lot of this is either based on misunderstanding or people who are unaware of the language in the code, things that can help both the teachers and the parents and us.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're all heading with this. Anything that we can do to help minimize both the impact on them and on us would be best.
Very good.
Okay, now have we solved yet, though, how we get in touch with teachers who are getting the large gifts? Remember that when we tried to do them directly to teachers via the school, they got opened by staff. See, that one, I think you have to have a designated person like
I think
Hess,
if there's
Todd
a
Hess.
designated ethics officer, it's just that
Or
you
even
get
not
that
a-
luxury of having everything handled in-house, and you don't have this board mailing out letters like that and trying to.
So maybe that's a good thing to talk to Todd about, because that was Todd's main thing is, well, why is it going to the principal? So maybe, since he made that comment, we send him to him.
Yeah, we need a point person.
Sure, I mean, there's a lot.
I mean, that would be
Well, the
mine.
concept is, wouldn't the
Yeah.
district prefer to have it handled in-house as much as possible?
I would think so.
Right? We're
but,
trying
but
to.
but I know, like Dee said, that there was pushback when we were
Right.
looking at that last year. But I don't disagree with what you're saying.
What about email? The teachers don't. All the teachers have like an official.
Yeah, they do,
ASD
that we can look up.
email account that it's already a public
Readily
record,
accessible.
right? So it's not like a home
Yeah,
address
that's true.
or even a personal phone number. it's an official email and contact them through that official email, right? So
And that goes directly to them and not to anywhere else.
Well, that's right. Then you don't have the problem of someone else opening the form. They immediately say, and then the email can be
Great
simple.
idea.
Oh, we got your disclosure. It's on the wrong form. It's a new form. Could you please check the updated form? You might not even need to disclose.
Here's the link.
Here's the link.
That's a great idea. So now why did we just discuss this for half an hour?
I think it would be really nice to have a designated ethics officer that could take first crack at all of these.
Yes.
Because if somebody looked at all these, they'd all be resolved.
So if we contact the teacher directly via email, are we going to eliminate the CC too? Or is there an appropriate person to CC it to? Or no?
I think currently there almost isn't a CC person, whether do you
I've been
CC a
CCing
principal,
Kathleen. She might want me
or-
to stop.
Well, you don't CC me.
I CC you, I sent you all the forms that I sent out via email.
Oh, I got this stuff for this meeting,
Oh,
but that's all I get.
okay.
I can say, you know, to extent, because I don't think this is a huge quality control issue. I would rather not CC principals. It smacks of discipline, and you know they're all in a union, and should there be notice, and all the other myriad of questions. When these are sort of simple matters, you know, you got $100 spot. I'm not sure it needs to go to another person, because it also implies to that other person that they should be taking some type of action. Do they put it in, you know, if Todd gets it, is he obligated then to put it in the teacher's personnel file? And we don't want any of that. We just want to start cleaning this up. So I would certainly advocate that we don't CC other people at this time. Now, if we get one that's outrageous, maybe the board makes a decision, say we think that someone needs to be notified, and maybe that's Todd. That someone else needs to be aware of these. But, you know, those are few and far between at this point since the ADN articles.
Well, why don't we do that and see how that works at any rate? You know, so when we get these on the wrong form, we'll pull up their email address. We'll email them saying just, you know, with a simple, you know, please use the correct form. Here's the link. And we'll see how that works, right? You know, we'll see if.
So if we're doing that, but still
resubmit using the new form.
newsletter would be.
Well, if you don't
Very
have the
helpful.
newsletter gets to the parent side, and that really is the best way to go, because if you could get parents to be cognizant of the fact that there are these limits and
Yeah.
that the teacher could get in trouble, but you know, through their generosity, and then parents could sort of like steer their gift then in the proper direction, either in terms of amount or doing it anonymously or making it for supplies and things like that. You know, they could
Yeah.
figure out, okay, I don't want to get my teacher in trouble, so what can I do about that? That's the best solution, because that cuts all of this stuff off right from the get-go. To some degree, by the time it gets to us, we're already 3/4 of the way down the road, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then there's a lot of trying to unring the bell, right? It's like, oh, that gift you got 6 weeks ago, don't use it. You haven't used it. You know, it would better prevent that altogether.
We had a couple of fishing charters of late. But the chances were that those had already been used.
Yeah, and those machines, that's right. So. All right, good. Does anyone have anything else for that?
So
Yes.
I will work with Todd regarding the newsletter and seeing if we can add in an FAQ of things to do wrong, that are done wrong versus how you could correct it, wrong form. But then also see if maybe we can add to this a newsletter, and that the Ethics Commission will come up with a note, and you would want it, and then maybe in that note you can put the times of year, because you know when you get the forms in for what times as to when it would be best to send it out. So that would be the other thing that might be helpful to have.
Did you-
Yeah,
Did you want to
typically
share
we do
with
that.
Kathleen how you have handled some of them that have gone over the line, or you know have been beyond acceptable?
Well, typically, I don't know if this kind of, but we have a sort of a form letter now that we send out to the teachers, saying, you know, here's a reminder of what the policy is. Here's why your gift was probably in violation of that policy. If someone were to file notice of potential violation, you know, and some, you know, depending on the circumstance, we say, you know, if this gift is still around, see what you can do to either give it back or give it to charity or to the PTA. Find some way to sort of diffuse the gift. Though again, that's an imperfect solution because from a conflict of interest perspective, the damage is already done. If I give you $5,000 and then you turn around and give it to the charity of your choice, well, it's already too late. It's sort of like the favorable impression that I'm trying to create through that gift has already been made, and it won't be diffused simply because now you've given it to a charity that you like. Maybe you don't feel as good as if you got to keep the $5,000, but you still feel pretty good because you just gave $5,000 to your favorite charity. But that's what we're doing now. And then in the extreme cases, we'll bring, as Dee was saying, we'll bring a teacher in and just try to, again, the point is education. So I just try to walk the teacher through, why was this a violation of the code, and to some degree explain to them sort of the logic behind the code. So the one who cried, in part, was utterly unapologetic about receiving airline vouchers, which they used to fly to Seattle, and a gift from a student during an academic year. Was utterly unapologetic. And so they weren't getting it. So it wasn't just that they weren't aware of the code restrictions, but they didn't understand the logic behind it. And obviously, if you don't understand the rationale behind a rule, you're not going to really be particularly enthused about following it, right? And so we sort of had to explain to her why doing that was unethical, and that's when she started crying, And so, but she said things like, I don't know about you, I'm not going to apologize for it. Getting those airline tickets was the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for me. And we were like, well, that's the problem, right? Right, you're an official. You are in an official capacity in ASD. You should not be receiving gifts from people that you would characterize as the nicest thing anyone's ever done for you. While then assigning grades to their child, it just maybe feels good for you, but it reeks from a sort of from a professional ethics standpoint. So that's what we do. That's.
Well, but I would say that we have taken a much harder line. I mean, in the past, when we got these disclosures, we did send out that letter saying, hey, this is probably in violation. You may need to watch this, blah, blah, blah. But because of the new code, and Glenda, you can kick in here at any time if you want to, we have basically said, no, you can't accept it, give it back. Yeah, and we've had teachers, I've had somebody call and say, how can I do this? I feel embarrassed. I have to give this back. What do you mean I have to give this back? According to the new code, you are not allowed to accept this. And it doesn't mean that you get to, because we had the discussion of it's $100. Do you keep 50 and get 50 back?
Right.
And Glenda, please, you can probably do better.
So what we did, because we had some that came before us that were, gifts that were in an excess amount. And so the board worked with crafting different options on what do you do in that situation. And so part of that process was a reach out to the state ethics attorney to see how the state handles a similar situation, because we want to be consistent at this level with the state. And so I spent a considerable amount of time talking with the state ethics attorney and got his input on gift issues with the state. And from there, circled back to the board, and it was the decision of the board to take a harder line on it and not get into the business of crafting that $75 is $25 over, so you get to keep 50 and you got to figure out what to do with $25 extra. And took a much more different approach. Was the gift's not proper, period, you need to return it. And that was the approach. Now, obviously, if a designated ethics attorney wanted to craft solutions in-house, that would be the first step for them to sit down. If the approach the board's taking is too hard a line, then an in-house ethics officer would be a good place to start with trying to figure out how, for ASD, it's got some unique, there's uniqueness to the school district that's different than some other divisions of the municipality. What might be the better solution to craft? But for the board, the harder line was the approach. Otherwise, I think we felt like we would just be lost in the weeds. We'd never see the light of day.
Otherwise, we could do the Boston alternative. No gifts, period. None are acceptable.
Yeah.
And it's working in lots of, that's not the only school district. A lot of school districts have said no gifts.
And I think there, we did get pushback when, because we've discussed that. As
Well, I mean, well, that was just, that was just showing, hey, it's going on out
Yeah,
there.
I know.
We weren't necessarily saying you have to do that, but
Yeah.
it was.
Good, and D, I'm sorry, you had something.
Oh, no.
Did you? Okay. Anything else? Anything else on Kathleen here?
No, we have.
Okay, yeah, so, well, again, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for
Thank you
making
very
time
much.
for comments.
Terry?
This is very-
We've got Kathleen at the table, so I strategically placed A2 in line because we pulled Kathleen's gift disclosure last time, and we never made a discussion about it. We never accepted it with the consent agenda, and I didn't know if you maybe had questions of her about it.
Okay.
So it's under
My Brad
gifts
Paisley
by
comment,
elected.
too?
Your Brad Paisley. It's
Okay.
under the
We're
blue
really
tab.
Really hard on you guys.
Blue tab. Is this gifts elected officials?
Mhm. And you actually
go.
pulled this one last time, Terry.
Right.
Looks like it's under your red notebook, isn't it?
I actually brought it just so that because I wanted to have the gift disclosure for elected officials as well as the other form I was going to present.
So I just wanted to ask you, so the United Way, do they do things in anything with the school district that you might wind up voting on or something like that? I mean, so.
Really, this is because I'm a pretty massive volunteering donor for United Way as well as Arise.
Right.
But this was United Way had got a bunch of tickets from whoever the ticket master for Global Spectrum.
Right.
And said, pass these out to your volunteers. So I got it from my volunteer activity I do with United Way.
Right.
I
Well,
don't
this
know.
is to the concert for Brad Paisley. I was trying to figure what it was, right? These are the tickets for the. Brad
It was the
Paisley
ticket for
concert.
the Brad Paisley concert that was April
Wow.
25th. I had to look to see what the day was. And it was a pretty quick notice. I mean, I think we got it, and it actually came to my work email because that's where I do my volunteer and my donations
Right.
through.
Right.
But
But as a
but
school
do
board
we
member,
have-
would
as a
you
school
would you ever
board-
want up voting on something that would affect the interests of United Way? So let me give you an example.
We do have
Okay.
partnerships. We do have partnerships. We do have a partnership. The administration does with United Way and also with Arise. They're memorandums of understanding.
Okay.
Have I ever voted on anything with that? No.
But
It's-
you might with Global Spectrum if you decide to move the graduation to the Left Airline Center. That's a possibility. I mean, I'm throwing stuff way out.
Well,
there.
I know, and it's a good thing to throw that out there. Haven't to this point. I doubt we would vote on it because it would not come up to the level. The cost of it would not come up. Would
It typically
the
goes to
Sullivan?
the superintendent, right?
It would go to the superintendent. Right now, the level of authority that the superintendent has for even renting the Sullivan does not come to us. I doubt that would ever come to. It wouldn't be enough money to come to us in terms of level. But it's a good question. I didn't even know who it came from until after, so I got that after the fact. Right. So
Right.
bad to say, but what is what it is. And then even trying to find out the value of the ticket was kind of difficult. I mean, that's an estimate on my part of what it looked like it would have been through the scalp prices, but because that's all that was out there.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Well, that was really the only question I had. That was just my concern.
Yeah.
It's just because remember part of it,
Well,
the
absolutely.
logic's not like what's going on in your heart of hearts, right?
Yeah.
You could be 100% innocent in your heart of hearts.
Yeah.
Part of what is the appearance? What would the average citizen think?
Well, and that's
If they think,
why.
oh, wait a minute,
I
this
disclose
official
all
just
of my
received
stuff, yeah.
this
Yeah.
gift. Do they see it? So you could imagine, you know, is someone doing a lot of volunteer work with, you know, with Campfire, right? You know,
And
they
because
can't-
of that might be
okay,
getting
well,
some
that's right, and then you get a
benefit.
gift from Campfire that's related
Yeah.
to your volunteer work. But if you're also sitting on the school board
We
making
have an
decisions
impact.
about what contracts Campfire is going to get for school programs, and like,
Yeah.
then you could see,
Yeah, and-
even if
and
you're
absolutely.
100% pure in your heart,
Well,
you can
you
see
can
the
even-
average citizen looking at it going, oh, that
You can
that's
even
not
take
right.
it one step further with Arise. ConocoPhillips, my employer, has given a massive gift to Arise. Well, I've given a massive gift to Arise.
Mhm.
And I serve on their leadership council. I don't get anything as a result, but I understand exactly what you mean. That's why I probably have more gift disclosures than any other public official. This last year we haven't got as many doodads, so I haven't done very many. But what can I say?
Do you have any questions for us?
No. Well, did I get all the ones answered? I think I asked most of them as we were going through regarding to this one, and I think you're going to do the email. I think the email is better. And then I like the idea of maybe adding to the procedure the seeing a way to put it into newsletters and the statement.
Okay.
And then the only other one is the ethics officer, and I'm probably not I really can't say, oh yeah, we'll do that. That's something to go through and
Okay.
talk on. But I don't have any issues with doing it.
Okay, good.
So you're okay with what I said on?
No, that seems. Does
Yes.
that give anyone else heartburn?
Nope.
Yeah, no, I think I'm good with that. I did want to clarify because to me it's like United Way School District. I don't see an obvious connection, but I wonder if
Well,
there is a connection. You know, and it sounds
No,
like there really
but
is.
still in all, I think per the way the regulation is I still have to disclose it.
Oh yeah, you still have to disclose.
Yeah.
The question is
Yeah.
whether we should advise you don't accept these kind of gifts in the future,
Yeah.
right? Or go to Brad Paisley and give him $153 or something like that, right?
He's a great concert anyway. He's a great
Well, I'm glad that
guitarist.
that's
I'm
good.
amazed. So
Yeah.
never been to one like that before. He's a great guitarist.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I think that's a wrap for this particular issue. So again, thank you for coming and making
Oh,
the
you're
time.
welcome.
It's really helpful.
Did you not take a sandwich?
6B.
Oh yeah, please take a sandwich before you go. Have a
I already
sandwich.
ate.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
All right. Well.
I already had a sandwich.
But these are extra ethical sandwiches.
Can we,
They were
did we
made
have something to
without-
vote on this?
We did not. I think this was mostly an informational item
Okay.
to work through some things with Kathleen.
Can we take up Ms. Domboski's?
She's here. We should.
Let's
yes.
work with her. She's been waiting very patiently.
I could have gone before if you were doing lunch. I'm sorry. Or after.
No, I
I
am
did go before.
just glad that people will listen.
Which item is?
6B.
There's another
Are we-
one
is
chair,
this-
Amy, if you want to pull up
You
the
want this
table.
chair or this is more
Oh yeah. Are we still going? You know something?
Yeah, that one, that chair there's wrong.
Before we move on, can we have a motion to accept Kathleen's disclosure here on the for this?
So moved.
Right. We have a second. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. All right, so that's accepted.
All right.
Okay, and with that, I hand the gavel back over to our honorable David M. Nesbitt,
Thank you, Vice Chair.
attorney at law, and gentleman of the world.
So, Ms. Domboski's here, so we're going to take up item 6B. And I don't know where it fits in this, but I just assume, can we just take it?
Just forget
We could probably start
I'm not
off-
even going to try anymore.
Amy, I believe the request for advisory opinion is to get a form for you to use. This is a first shot at a form, by the way. The beginning of the form, there's one element that's important that's missing.
That's right, we discussed this last time. We
Right,
tried to come up with
right.
it. Yes, that's right.
And we thought, one can have sort of a generic form for any assembly person, but also stuff that could be helpful for Amy's situation. So this is the more generic form. And if you notice at the beginning, it simply cites, the disclosure requirement. And then it attempts to provide some process, which I have to give a little bit of thought of, whether we can simply say this or the assembly adopts it. And basically it says, the purpose of this form is to facilitate mandatory ethics disclosures prior to assembly meetings. Any assembly member may move the assembly to determine whether an item disclosed in this form requires determination, more information basically. You file this at least one day prior to the meeting. This constitutes compliance with 035, the disclosure requirements. No action by the assembly prior to deliberation and determination of the item constitutes a ruling by the assembly that the disclosed financial or personal interest is not substantial. In other words, the assembly person fills this out. You see it says agenda number, the AO, where the base, well, it says description of item, copy, paste, item title, or describe. And by the way, this is an Adobe form, so it'll be, you can fill it out online when we upload it to the clerk's thing. And then description of potential financial interest and statement why it is not substantial. Now, I would like to go a lot further than that. So, for instance, especially in Amy's case, and whether we do a form, so for instance, purchases, AFD purchases. The things we care about is whether family member, household member was involved in the solicitation process, is involved in the administration, and if there's any sort of substantial direct impact to that family member. So if all AFD people are getting new breathing apparatus, that's not just to her husband. Her husband happens to be on the Swift Water team, so maybe if they're buying rafts or something. But that we actually have some boxes.
On Tudor?
No, Eagle River.
Oh, the Eagle River. Oh, okay.
So
Remember the kayaker that got stuck under the lock?
Yeah.
That was his
Oh.
group.
Wow.
So that we could actually have, I was thinking about either do we do a third page that says, if it's a purchase, please address these 3 points. But we sort of want that to be potential for a checklist, make this as easy as possible also for
So this is prior to every single meeting, she got to fill out this form?
She does it
Or
already.
the assembly person?
Can I
Well-
give a little,
Yes.
and hello, assembly members that I've not met before, nice to meet you all. So right now, the way I read the ethics code is I have the responsibility and the requirement, I have to make the disclosures, and depending on who the chair is, Patrick was way more tolerant than Dick is, to be honest with you. Dick just tells me I don't have to do it, and I tell him he doesn't really have the authority to tell me I don't have to do it, because code says I have to do it. So we've been in this banter, and it's annoying everyone, and to me, I don't really care if it's annoying them, it's for the public, in my opinion. So we've recognized the fact, and I've had these conversations with Dee, there's no process for the assembly to deal with these issues, really, other than at the meeting. And I do this every meeting. Our books that we get are substantial, and I go through everything. If anything says AFD, I make a disclosure, period. The only thing the assembly has, anytime it gets closer, there's only one thing they've told me I can't vote on, and that's the IAFF contract.
CBA.
Yeah, the collective bargaining agreement. But bargaining guidelines, I've been allowed to participate on because it's all the unions, it's not just one union. And plus it's advisory for the administration. This is what the assembly wants you to do, but what they negotiate could be different. So, and we have the whole checklist in the front of our packet. Is this a substantial private interest? Is this held by you or a larger group? And we go through that. Some of them aren't as good at, they just say it. Sometimes I try to get them to formalize a little bit more because I think it's better for public process. So for the most part, they just tell me, oh yeah, we've already said you don't have a conflict, you don't have a conflict. So we're trying to find a way that's more transparent for the public, because I'm seeing the assembly kind of just brush it really quickly by. So I know there's another thing that the ethics board does at some point where people once a year come and say, I have this financial thing. And I didn't know if it could be handled that way or if it's more appropriate to be handled this way. I honestly, it's easier for me, but it doesn't matter if I get one blanket disclosure a year, because I think it's for the public's interest. So to me, I'd rather err on that side than on the side of what's easier for Amy, because I already do that every meeting anyway.
Well, I can tell you, because one downside of a blanket year, I think you will get people complaining. We've had citizens file notice of potential violations, arguing that people did not disclose, and it turned out they had disclosed an executive session or things like that. And so the disclosure had been made, but the citizen at that assembly meeting didn't see it, and that's part of the thing maybe to think about is that.
And the other thing too that I noticed, and I did it last night with a cell phone tower that happened to be on my street that was being proposed. I make the disclosure when the item's introduced, because my opinion is, if you're gonna take any action on an item, so if it's on the consent agenda, and by not abstaining, I'm actually consenting to it moving forward, to me, that's action. So I make the disclosure if I don't miss it. Now, there has been once or twice where, I didn't see it on instructions, so I catch it later if it has a public hearing, but for the most part, I try to do it right up front. But then the second meeting when it comes back for a public hearing, I make the disclosure again for the public and say, listen, at the last meeting, I had already disclosed this, and the body already ruled I don't have a conflict. That way, if somebody didn't see that last meeting, they know I made it. But I'm like the super anal one in the group, would you say? And I typically tend to just be overly cautious, and that's why we're here today. Is because I want the board's help in finding the best way forward. Not only to satisfy code, but to also be transparent for the public. And if that means, what I'm expecting is, if this ends up getting, recommended by the board, I'll bring it forward in an AR. That way the assembly's actually adopted this process.
Well, and I'm thinking now more of a combination. The opinion can say, okay, as to these types of transactions, purchases, that if there is no solicitation, administrative roadblock, then the board would find that there would be no conflict of interest. With respect to CBA and the labor agreements, here are our standards. In respect to, you get a lot of, you were telling me, routine reports that AFD's part of. Economic reports, so that maybe you could do an AO that would say those things and say the board has found that these are not, although it's not really the board's role to find whether you have conflicts is the problem.
No, it's all about disclosures. And that's why Trini keeps telling me not information, because he said it was fine. But my point is, he said it was fine on that particular item. He doesn't know what's being purchased next month. And so,
Well, and the problem is, if a citizen files a notice of potential violation, it will not be up to Dick Cheney whether you violated the ethics code.
Exactly.
It'll be
Right,
up
so
to
you're
this
right
board.
there.
exactly. And so that's why I say I don't mind doing it this way, because I already have to make in my opinion, I already have to make disclosures. If this is going to free up, a minute and a half of the assembly's time, so they don't have to hear me every single meeting, it seems like that's what some of them are wanting to do. But with a new chair, it might be different. Every chair. So that's why if we have some sort of standardized process, Patrick he was way more tolerant of my disclosures.
Well, because he does it too.
How much time per meeting are we talking? How much time per meeting gets used up with?
Probably. It depends how many there are. I mean, there have been some meetings where I'm making 9 disclosures. There's other meetings where it's just 2.
So let's take a worst case scenario. You do 9 disclosures. How long do you think each disclosure?
Well, I've been grouping them.
Okay.
So I have been, if they're purchases for AFD, I'll group them in, I tier them. So if the closer it gets to my husband's interest, I do it separately, and I make them roll on it separately. You might be talking anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty average.
So the concept is, with this form, you would be able to fill this out ahead of time. It would still be time on your part, but it would not be assembly time. Is that the concept?
Right.
It would be satisfying the disclosure requirements. It would be it would be a public disclosure.
It would be a public document.
But it may help the process move more smoothly for the chair. Well, I mean for the body. But.
And then maybe if we could have it indicated somewhere, like in the assembly agenda, or just have the chair just make a quick announcement that, there's been disclosure by you. Disclosure
And
will be
you
by.
can do that in the chair's report.
Right.
The other thing I would
That's
say
true.
is there has to be somewhere in the process for, it doesn't have to be just this way, it can also be a verbal disclosure, because it happens all the time where items are laid on the table or they're on the addendum and they're not given to us till we walk into the meeting. And so that being the case, or you have a packet of 1,500 pages that you're given to read over the weekend, and you might have gone through and missed one, and then you all of a sudden you're looking at this 10-page, 12-page agenda, and you realize, oh no, there's an informational report, and this happens all the time with the budget, first quarter budget revisions, a monthly update. You're given, all of a sudden, it'll get snuck by you, and then you realize there's an AFD line item in there, in this, $300 million budget or whatever. So I really try to do that, but there's really nothing for the assembly to do with informational reports other than accept them. So those ones, I guess I haven't been as particular about. I mean, I try, but there's so many of them. I just try to find a process that I know these are the rules and you follow them.
So I think when we talked about this last, I suggested that there might be some form that could be itself part of the consent agenda, and there was some concern from me and others that might not be feasible because the agenda doesn't come together till the last possible minute. What's our current state of thinking on that? I mean, this form would require you to know with some particularity what's coming before the board. Have we moved back to the idea that we could do something with this shut as a consent item?
Well, I think I was assuming that you, generally you have most of the agenda by Monday at noon. And so Amy would do this Monday between 12 and 1 o'clock and get it filed.
The meeting starts at 5, I got to 5.
Well, Monday.
24 hours, I read
Yeah,
it.
that's right, okay, well, yeah. So that's what I was thinking, is really, they do know the majority of things by that noon. There's always a trickle, I mean, most of the addendum is even done by that. Today, this last time was unusual. So it's only the later on the table items. And those there's probably no way to
Well, and those can happen
process
during
that.
the meeting.
Yeah, you don't know
You
anyway.
know, it's all
right?
political strategy,
Yeah.
really, when those hit, so,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Because I think we can help with disclosure, but we really can't rule on the conflict. That's the chair.
That's right.
Well, and there is, and I think, I was thinking the same thing actually earlier, because I thought, part of this is I'm making the disclosure for the body and the public, right? But the assembly still, typically when I make the disclosure, the chair rules, or he puts it on the board and the body rules. So by me just making the disclosure, there's still no ruling. So, but if it is incorporated as, in the consent agenda as an item, these are all the disclosures. I mean, that might be, Lisa, you know better than I do how this is put together. Barbara, but I would think that'd be possible.
Well, I don't know, because I don't have a copy of the thing, so I don't even know what we're
I'm
talking
sorry.
about.
Well,
Well, listen to this.
Well, no, I'm not trying. I'm just like, it just seems like this, because getting stuff, are you talking about this is going to actually be on the agenda?
Well, I do my disclosure, that's what kind of what I'm talking about.
Because that
That's
would be
publicly
huge pain to do at the last minute. I think that this is,
I
Let me ask
think
about that though. It seems like the consent agenda item would be the same item every single time. It would just be approval, finding by the chair or finding by the body that there is no substantial conflict of interest disclosed by Ms. Demboski's disclosure form. And the form would change every week.
She would file a new form each week, but
The agenda item would
the
be the same.
item was
so the agenda item would read the same,
Yeah.
but then you'd have a different form.
Yeah.
But
But you know what I could do? I could do the same thing I've always done. I rather than, in the beginning, they always make you pull the item from the agenda, and then somebody else moves it, so you can make your disclosure because you can't take action on an item before there's ruling, right? So I pull it. Patrick moves it for me. I make my disclosure. The chair rules. You don't have a conflict. Then we vote on the individual item. Well, you can imagine when we have many items. So they discouraged me from pulling items. So what I started doing is before they even pull the items off of the agenda, during committee reports, which is in the very beginning, I just say, okay, here's all my disclosures. And I just do it every meeting during committee reports, because they do that before they do consent agenda. So I can continue to say, Mr. Chairman, I just made all my disclosures. It's online or whatever.
And I guess that's the way I'm looking at it. It does not take, when you do that, when you do all your conflict under your comments, I'm telling you, it does not take her more than
I've
like a
gotten faster.
minute
I've gotten faster.
to put it there, and then it's on the record, and it gets reproduced in the minutes. It's not that cumbersome. Now with this one, even if you had a generic on the agenda, still that thing that changes is not disseminated. So it until the last minute. So it would be a thing where it's passed out, and then you got to get it put on the website, and it's got to be inserted into the agenda, and that is a huge deal to do at the last minute. We've been trying to move away from the late on the table items, because if people are literally getting it to us on that day, Heidi is having to insert and recompile, and then it has to be published, and then it has to be exported into Granicus and back up on the website. And that it's a big deal to do that. So to me, it doesn't seem like that's solving any problem to have it just a blurb on the, agenda. And it's not really giving the public any information if transparency is the issue, because they're not going to get it until the last minute, until this thing gets uploaded, on the website. There's no, you're not going to even know till the last
And
minute.
now I'm thinking about it, if we go to the paper route versus my verbal disclosures, which I do anyway, I mean, it seems like we're sticking with the same process. I mean, I don't know if this is really helping anything.
It seems like it saved you a few minutes in the room on Tuesday at the expense of causing a lot more administrative hassle here.
Right. And less
Clerk's office.
transparency, and
Well,
did we get
citizens
Amy's
won't like it as
form?
much,
You
and
know,
so I think
Oh, that's
citizens
true.
want to hear. They want to,
Yeah.
I mean, to have a little point on the consent agenda. Oh, there was disclosure and it's been approved. I think
Right.
citizens
Almost
want
like it's
to
being
hear.
tucked in there.
Well,
and-
I think
Yeah.
citizens, and you're going to get grief. I think you're still everything an AFD thing comes up. A citizen in that room is going to be like, oh, wait a minute, she didn't.
Right.
And it's going to be grief. You'll wind up getting emails about it. We'll get complaints, and maybe the answer will wind up being, "Oh, don't worry, there was this system we worked out, so really all
Right.
that." But that's not going to satisfy.
But
the
it would seem to be to
citizen.
your benefit to be able to speak at the assembly, rather than just have this tucked in later, and then somehow it comes back to you.
Well, that's why I've been so overly
Mhm.
passionate about making sure the disclosures are done, and I try to be verbal about, okay, he's a member of this union and, captain of the fire department. So I try to be very, very vocal about it.
Because you're repeating for the assembly's benefit, but they all know that. But it's
Yeah.
also for the audience.
And that's
So
what,
public.
that's
It's
what
for
I
the public.
told the chairman when we kind of got into a little
Yeah.
discussion. One day I'm like, Mr. Chairman, it's nice that you think so, but this is really for the public
Mhm.
too. So I try to do that, and I just didn't, this is an interesting one, and it's, I'm really, I've done it for 2 years now. I don't have a problem making the disclosures. It's just, like I said, this particular chair is a little less enthusiastic about all the disclosures. So,
And I mean, thinking this out further, for public disclosure, there has to be either a written form or the verbal disclosure. And as Bill says, this saves the assembly 5 minutes at huge expense to the clerk's office, time-wise.
And to the public, too, as far as dissemination of the information, right?
Effective dissemination.
Effective.
Well, that's right. And potentially you. I mean, like,
Mhm.
you are golden
Oh, yeah.
when you
That's
make
right.
your oral disclosure right then and there. And I mean, you are 100%
Mhm.
protected. The more kind of
Mhm.
sophisticated the procedure winds up getting, the more you're not as well protected, either in appearance
Or
right?
perceived by the public.
Well, that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
Even if with
that's-
this board you're 100% protected, it
Right.
won't look as good potentially.
well, see, and
to
that's what
your
when I
constituents.
first saw this, I thought, well, that's good, and it makes me a little nervous putting everything in writing, because I'm like, well, what if I miss one?
All right.
Mhm.
That's why I'm like, well, I want to have
Right.
something in case I miss one, but at the same time, I already know how many people actually go to the website and read everything.
Right.
Or how many people, I mean, it's hard enough even having them follow the agenda. You can have something written out in front of them, and they're holding it in their hands, and they come up and tell you it says something totally different.
I know one older gentleman who probably reads the whole thing every time. Who shows up to our meetings and makes sure we do the proper procedures.
Oh, Eugene? Oh, I'm sure.
Well, so.
So that's why I say, to me, I just wanted, this is you guys' kind of turf of, public perception and the code, and I just want to make sure we're doing it the best we can. And so if there's recommendations on making it better, I will do that.
I have a recommendation on making it better. And I don't know if some of you know that I do occasionally do the minutes for the meeting, and I'm telling you, it comes up. She says, "I want to, disclose like, bing, bang, bing, bing, boom." I'm writing down all the items. It gets put in there. It takes hardly any time, at all for that process to happen. And I lost my complete train of thought.
But you had an idea.
Something that could save time.
Oh, here's the thing. Here's what I see as the problem. And I guess, earlier I acted a little passionately, but I wasn't passionate about the fact that I didn't have a form. I was passionate because this is kind of like bothers me, because I do the minutes and then I'm also, actually publishing the minutes, writing the minutes. You do your disclosure, and then the chair will say something like, yeah, whatever, blah, 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 blah. It is a problem to not be able to put down that there was thoughtful consideration of your disclosures.
Yeah.
So I don't think the improvement piece is on your part.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the improvement piece needs to take place there, where the chair actually maybe needs to take the time to go through the questions.
Well, that's why you've seen them in a couple of meetings when other members have conflicts. You've seen Dick turn to me and say, Amy, because he knows I'll pull out my sheet and I'll go down, Mr. Flynn, do you have, and I just read right from our questions that we were given, this is what you're supposed to consider, because I'm trying to build the fact that there was consideration and it wasn't just a rubber stamp.
Right. And I'm telling you, and having to draft what I say, to say something without being untruthful, but to put in something in the record that says that there was some sort of
Yeah, because his
consideration
line
is
now
tough.
is, Ms. Dombrowski, we've already told you don't have a conflict.
And I can't write that down.
That's what he
Yeah,
said.
so
And I'm like, and some things like the cell tower, for example, like I was like pushing them. I'm like, listen, there might be people out there that say, I mean, you're literally considering putting a cell tower across the street in front of my, front window. So I really pushed. I said, some people could say I might have. And so I really pushed that, even though, I felt I could be fair and impartial and I could participate. They were a little bit more lax. And so, I don't know, whatever you guys think. Now that you know the issue, it's smarter
Well, you're still
minds than-
representing the other 49,999 people.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and again, this came to us more as a waiver issue, but I don't see waiver.
No.
The code section, that waiver code section is much more confined, doesn't really apply to the situation. But I'm trying to think of, even in the long run, how could you do, because I think the very first meeting when Mr. Honeman and Dick Trainee came, that we said there's public process. And we, by the way, pointed out that the current public process of just saying, no, you're okay, was probably not adequate, and maybe this could be used to improve that process as well.
Is there a way that you could potentially limit your disclosures if it's only something to do like your husband's contract? That definitely is something that you would have.
Well, that's what we were discussing. I mean, that was the whole question.
Yeah.
How far do I have to go? I mean, because right
But if
now,
we're running a fire
the
engine.
contract, and this is I disclose everything, AFD, everything, but, right, the contract we know I've been excluded from, right? The collective bargaining agreement, it was more mixed. It was a closer vote, but I was still allowed to participate. Everything else AFD I've written. But what if my husband's crew specifically is getting a new $40,000 boat that he spec'd out, or a fire engine that he spec'd out? And now that has happened.
Okay.
He has done that.
If that
Not
is-
typically, but
Yeah.
twice in his career.
But on the other hand, you're representing the members of your community as well, and is it for the best of the community?
True, and that's why when those questions get closer, I make the disclosure, I make my pitch, and I said right off on his contract that though I think I can detail, I think there would be a major, perception issue and blah, 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 so I was excluded. But with other things, I've made the case, well, yes, my husband is this, and I fully disclose it, but I feel like, the public interest, I can serve the public interest. So that's why they've always let me, but I think the closer you get, the more robust that you have to be about pushing to make sure that disclosure is highlighted, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm just reading this again here. The jurisdiction of the board to determine a violation, elected official, after disclosure of a financial private interest is expressly limited to the sufficiency of the disclosure. So again, we can't waive the conflict. It's up to the assembly to waive their own conflict. Number one, and number two, we need public disclosure.
Where's the waiver provision?
It's in contracts. It's for solicited contracts. And
Oh, so it's not.
It's not even in the conflict of interest
So
section.
really,
It's-
this form that we've, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but that's where it is. It's in the contract section. It's acquiring a municipal contract.
Bill, I'll find it for you.
So this was developed not as a waiver, but as a way of
Just
speeding up the process.
Disclosure, yeah.
And that doesn't sound like,
No, it doesn't sound like
it doesn't
it's
sound
gonna
like this is helping at all. My proposal is to drop this and for you to continue as you are currently doing. And then if the chair of the assembly, Mr. Trainee, wants to discuss it further with us, we're happy to, if there needs to be a discussion where we can help facilitate this disclosure at the meetings, then maybe we can do that. But it sounds to me like what's happening is what should be happening. And I don't know if the rest of the board agrees with me, but I think that's kind of where, that's my sense of where we're at.
I'm fine with it. I mean,
Okay.
and that's why I said I just know it was something that I keep being told that you don't have to do it. And yes, I do. I
Mhm.
really do.
Right.
Well, and looking at that section, I mean, if you look at 035C, right, and this is the thing that Bill was pointing to earlier, right, that the presiding officer can, exercise parliamentary authority to make an initial ruling on the disclosure. So, I mean, it still can be pretty efficient. I mean, it looks to me like you're consistent with it. You don't have to go through, let's question
Right,
the person
right.
for each and everything. It does seem to me that what Mr. Trainee could simply say is something like, I accept your disclosure, and
Right.
and I rule that you have no significant conflict of interest in this matter. And and then pause. Does any member on the
Does
body
anyone
want
have any
to
comment?
make a move to
That's
overrule
right.
me or not? Okay, good. Let's move
That's
on.
all that's needed.
So it can still be on his part. It can be brief. He can exercise
Yes.
that parliamentary authority and say, okay, I'll rule that there is no.
As a blanket part of the agenda to begin with.
Right. It can.
Or no, at least even on the case by case basis. So we don't so you could
Right.
continue making your oral disclosures in each case, and it doesn't have to be a big long worked out
Right.
process. I mean, it might be better if it were, right? From an ethical standpoint. But if efficiency is really sort of like at the crux here for Mr. Trainee, he can, as the chair, make that parliamentary ruling. Okay, I don't think you have a conflict in this matter. Let's move on.
And that satisfies it. Checks all the
It
boxes.
satisfies it, and then that way, but there is, but he can be overruled by the body, so someone can move at that point. Actually, I'd like the whole body to consider that, and then it can become a more involved thing. But it can be a pretty quick and easy thing in terms of the decision being made, and then that way you still get your disclosure out. You still get your disclosure out for each one.
Mhm. It sounds like you're getting more streamlined also with your.
I am, and that's why I said when there are multiple purchases. For example, last night I think there were two, one for a CAD system, like a computer-aided dispatch system for police and fire, and then there was safe purchase of foam for a fire truck, or something like that. I'll group those two together and I'll say item, and I'll try to say the item number and the AO number or the AR number, and then I'll give a brief. Okay, this is a purchase of a CAD system for, and then I go to the next one, and so I identify the item number. I try to identify the action item number and what it is, brief description, and then I'll say, as you and the body know, my husband's an Anchorage firefighter. He's a member of local IAFF House 64. I make the disclosure, so whatever. And sometimes if it's something to do financially, I'll just say I have no financial interest. If it's sometimes it's purchases from a certain vendor or something.
And what we've ended up doing on the minutes is we've said, Assemblymember Dombrowski made the following declaration of conflict of interest. That's the items. And then we say, based on Assemblymember Dombrowski's review, Chair Trainee ruled that she did not have a conflict.
Okay.
So we
Right.
don't even, try to even go there. We put it where you're the one doing the research and the review. And so that's what we ended up coming up with, which would be to the point, like you said, because you wouldn't want to go through every single one of those, in deliberation.
In
Yeah.
detail, right.
Well, and like I said, my goal is transparency and making sure that we're doing it as good as we can. If there's room for improvement, I'm happy to do it. If this means this, I'll do it. It means more work, but I'll do it. But whatever the board thinks is the best way to go, that's the way I want to go.
Well, it sounds to me like we're not really finding an effective avenue. That the written form will cause more time than it's worth. I, however, given the pushback on this whole issue, would like to do a one-page opinion stating why that is so, and help both us, and I think it'll help Amy as well. But basically, the points that I would like to put in that would be something about that the Board of Ethics cannot waive conflict of interest for the Assembly, that has to be done by the Assembly Chair, that all that we can review is disclosure, and given the disclosure, and also mention public process, and that with respect to the disclosure, we looked at sort of more efficient ways of disclosure. There is no waiver potential of disclosure under state or municipal law.
Who do you propose draft this?
I would do it.
Okay. Can we have it by next meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
and in fact, I will try to go do it in the next 2 days so it can get done.
Okay.
And,
Well, and then that might be helpful in the sense that if we wind up recommending that for now, you might as well just stick with your oral disclosures.
Yeah.
I
That
love
might,
it.
at least that might give
Yeah.
you something when you're getting grief
Yeah,
from
I'd
your
rather
fellow
have
assembly
that.
You can
members.
say, "Look, you
this
met
is
with
what
the
the
board."
board told me to
Yeah.
do. They said this was the best thing for me to do.
I would love it. Like I
You can
said,
blame us,
it
you
gets
know.
to the point where the media is literally tweeting, Domboski's making another disclosure.
Right.
I mean, it's become a kind of a joke, but at the same time, they can joke about it all they want. What I care about is Edna, who comes in, who's really upset that I just voted on something fire department related. And she didn't know that I made the disclosure. So, you know, that's okay. I appreciate
It's
it.
the law.
That's
All
right.
right, yeah.
Well, and
the fact
again,
Well,
that-
entitled that is
and
the
it's no
law.
joke. I won't say who it was, but we've had assembly members in the past where people were making multiple complaints, and disclosures had been made, but they had been made in different either in executive, they'd been
That's
made
right.
in different avenues or in different ways, or the citizen had just missed it. They had just missed it when the disclosure had taken
Well, and
place.
they-
And so, if it's not front and center for citizens to see, they will make noise about it.
Well, and a lot of times, the disclosures are made in committee reports, so it's at the very beginning, right after 5 o'clock.
Right.
And so if people don't come in until 6:30,
That's
they may
right.
not have seen it. So hopefully, most of them are on the consent agenda. Like I said, if they're big contentious issues, or, whatever, I typically will say during the item, when I first start to go into debate, I'll say, listen, I already made a disclosure on this, and I should move on. But that's good. And the other thing I think training needs to understand is he can't waive the requirement for me to make a disclosure.
Yeah, that's why I would like to
He's
put
trying to tell
something in
me
writing.
he can, but I know he can't.
No,
That's right.
that's why I'd like to put it in writing.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
you very much.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for waiting.
Oh, my pleasure. And I think you guys were perfectly timed. I am not worried about your timing at all.
Good luck on your lunch.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there will be. All right, thank you.
Speaking of which, I spoke with the ethics committee for the assembly, and they are going to give us time. They are going to postpone this proposal or this legislation or any debate on it until their August assembly, so that we can come up with something by next month, and that then I can then take it to them for their meeting, which is later in the month, with an update of what we anticipate giving them or what we're going to give them, and then they can then work on that in August. I think that's based on what I mentioned. Barbara came with me also, and we kind of outlined quickly what we had talked about here today. And Mr. Hall was very gracious.
Can I share or is that meeting's taped, right?
Mhm.
Oh, their meeting?
Yeah, so,
Mhm.
and we have easy access to that, it's right on the web, isn't it?
Mhm.
Okay, because it might be that we could take what was discussed about right then and quickly try to put it in more of an
Yeah,
opinion
that'd be perfect. yeah.
format.
Who can we get to do that?
Did you look at last week when I was
I don't know. I looked at an empty chair, longingly.
We worked 2 hours very, solid 2 hours, but we cleaned up a bunch of stuff. Now all of a sudden we have much more.
Yeah,
stuff.
and Dick is one of the people who is up for re-election in 2016. That might be-
16.
Yeah, that might be really.
And he
might be
also
able to take
mentioned-
it, use the.
Well, he mentioned, I don't know if I didn't interrupt you, I think I know where you're going. He mentioned that it was either co-sponsored or also adopted later as a co-sponsor by Mr. Honeman. Mr. Honeman is up for 16.
Yeah, see that's.
So he's
that-
okay.
So
well,
he's
and not
right.
only are they okay in terms of sponsorship, but
Right.
then Dick could, as chair, make rulings about other
That's
people's
right.
potential conflicts
That's
without
right.
himself suffering from the same conflict, thus triggering the logical
Mhm.
paradox.
Because he was
of it.
2006.
Because
That's
he's in
right.
2016, so he is shielded, so he'd be okay. But
Glenn,
I
did
think
you
this
get
will
that?
work.
sort of, so we already drafted this.
Sure, I haven't
How-
read this.
Which
Okay,
one is
so
this?
I don't.
This is what.
What I wrote? Yeah,
Right.
but it's wrong. I mean, because it
But-
doesn't break down the extra election year.
Right, but it's not.
Well, we can take this and move it.
Right.
And-
This
and
Well, actually, I
check
think
it.
a lot of it's right. I mean, I think a lot of it's right in the sense that people
Okay, the first
who think
page
that
is
there's
about it,
no
correct.
problem
Mhm.
at all here because you're what's being considered as potential contraction instead of
Mhm.
extension of the term.
Right.
I think the logic here is absolutely correct. That no, there is a potential ethical problem here
Mhm.
that needs to be considered because you're right. Allowing someone to vote. If you vote no, then you are in essence voting to keep your financial and private interest in the most, at this maximum level. So I think this is right. We just need now to consider this
Yeah,
a
the-
second
the
part,
remedy.
some of the logic of it, or some of the
All right.
logistics of it.
Can we, in the last 30 seconds, is there any way we can approve Glenda's draft of 7C so that, because Chair Tony needs it? needs that-
And I would
that
suggest that
opinion.
no, we can't, so that here's the opinion, people should take it home with them and read it for the next, this has been changed since.
Oh, so
what we
this,
got.
since this?
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Wow, okay.
take these home. look at them,
Okay. Probably not,
modify.
yeah.
And basically, this was on the one, about the marijuana.
This is marijuana?
resolution. Yeah, and, there it is, hot off the press
Well, it
again
depends
this
on
morning.
if we decide a meeting next time, because I'm hearing that we may have to have a second meeting here shortly.
Well, if we did a meeting in a week, I could be on task to do
Mm-hmm.
that one, and maybe this is the one I started, the other
And
one too.
finish this one?
Yeah, and then everybody could have read
Yeah,
this,
read
and
this on
just
time.
do those 3 opinions, period.
Okay.
Um,
And so that would be, say, an hour-long meeting.
An
rather
hour-long
than
meeting
two-
to simply discuss those 3 opinions. The letter, the opinion requested by Amy, which I'll
Mhm.
convert into what we talked about today.
Is that next
My
Wednesday?
finishing, what is today, Wednesday?
Mm-hmm. Do we have a quorum who can show up next Wednesday?
I can show up next Wednesday, but
I agree. I think I would love to be able to knock a few things
Yeah,
off.
get all 3 of those done.
Yeah.
And that, but everybody read this. And again, this was marijuana resolution. Terry took a first stab, then Glenda took a second one. I edited heavily both.
Is this based on did we each have comments to this?
No, I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
so.
All right.
But this is the one where can the assembly members bring forth the marijuana resolution? And at the end of the day, what the board really came to was that the language was so problematic
Mm-hmm.
that we couldn't say no.
Right.
That one became a bit of a moving target.
Mhm.
So it came in, and we
Right.
got that proposed draft,
Right.
and so based on the proposed
Right.
draft, I wrote the
Right.
dissertation.
And then they
And
changed
then-
it.
changed the draft.
And then
Right.
they changed the draft.
That's right,
Right,
yeah.
so then all of a sudden that became a bit obsolete. And
Right.
then they came back with what do you like this one better? This is more content neutral.
Right.
And then Terry drafted his response. So in order to get something, for public use to put up on, what we did was I took what I originally drafted and I took what Terry drafted and I mished them together a little bit and tried to come up with a conclusion that reflected really what the board's ultimate decision was, is this, as it was presented, was it partisan? Heck yes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do this sort of thing? You can, as long as it's sort of content neutral.
Mhm.
And that was sort of the
Right.
bottom line of it. And it was difficult to define, because there are no definitions of broadcast,
Right.
distribute, publish, that sort of stuff. So we, how do we address really cumbersome terminology that's
Mhm.
convoluted? So our recommendation was, hey, you can do this thing, but you really need to make it content neutral, and maybe we need to re-scrub some of these definitional terms so
Mhm.
people know what they're stepping into. Whether it's clerk staff or assembly staff, they can easily get swept up into something, not realizing that they're violating the code.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if the code's not going to define these terms, we might as well. Again, we might as well just tell people this is how this board's going to think of this section. of the
And this
code.
opinion doesn't do that. It simply says the code section is difficult to work with and needs to be revised, which ultimately I think is the way it needs to go. It's very badly done.
It just occurred to me too. We're having this meeting unusually late this month. We have our normally scheduled meeting the second week in July, don't we?
Yeah.
So that's 3 weeks from now. Do we want to have another meeting in a week and then another meeting in 3 weeks? I don't have a problem doing that. I just want to make sure that it's going to be a little
the problem
quicker
I have
than
next
normal.
Wednesday is Canada Day, and I don't do
Okay.
any labor on Canada
Yeah.
Day. It's
Well, this is
It's like a Sunday.
This
Like
is
a
love for
special
you.
day.
This isn't labor. And you get the wax.
It's a special day for me.
Because if other
Especially
people are
for
willing
young
to do
people.
it, I'd be willing to come in next week and in 2 weeks again. I just want to make sure that people are up for that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, we have enough people who can show up next Wednesday? All right, and then we'll get back on our regular schedule, which I think is the second Wednesday of the month,
Which
is
is
that right?
the 8th.
The 8th,
I did
6th,
look at all the stuff you
7th,
sent me.
8th.
All 45 of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
everybody.
We'll get to it.
All right, motion,
eventually.
anything else before we adjourn? Not right now? Hearing nothing. Hearing nothing but crickets, not even crickets. Motion passes. Adjourned.